Deformable curves and surfaces. Why curves and surfaces? Natural use for modeling of smooth shapes, easy to design, efficiently preserve complex structures. Smoothness can be guaranteed analytically. Compact representation, theory of smooth curves and surfaces, that is, from calculus and differential geometry, is well developed. Although smooth curves and surfaces are converted to polygonal curves and meshes when rendered, they still provide a good option for modeling. Polynomial curves and surfaces. In image representation, curves and surface are represented by polynomials. Approximation power can approximate any continuous function to any accuracy. Weierstrass's theorem can offer local control for shape design through the use of piecewise polynomials. All derivatives and integrals are available, infinitely smooth, and easy to compute. Compact representation. Efficient evaluation. For example, Horner's rule. Horner's rule. This is used to calculate polynomials. Consider a cube polynomial bt equals at cubed plus bt squared plus ct plus d. Straightforward way to evaluate bt takes 6 multiplications and 3 additions. But in Horner's rule, bt equals a star t plus b into t plus c into t plus d. It takes 3 additions and 3 multiplications. In general, n pluses and n stars for polynomial with degree n. Explicit and implicit function. Explicit curve can be calculated by y equals f of x, z equals f of x, y. Implicit curve can be calculated by f of x, y equals 0, f of x, y, z equals 0. The related parametric equations are shown on screen. Why parametric? It is simple and flexible. The function of each coordinate can be defined independently. X of t, y of t is 1D curve in 2D space. X of t, y of t, z of t is 1D curve in 3D space. X of s, t, y of s, t, z of z, t is 2D surface in 3D space. Polynomials are suitable for creating smooth surfaces with less computation. X of t equals a3t cubed plus a2t squared plus a1t plus a0. Hermite curves. 3D curve of polynomial basis, geometrically defined by position and tangents of endpoints, able to construct composite curve. It is used as a trace for camera with Fresnel frame or rotation minimizing frame. Hermite specification diagram can now be seen. A cubic polynomial x of t equals a3t cubed plus a2t squared plus a1t plus a0. T ranges from 0 to 1. Polynomial can be specified by position of and gradient at each endpoint of the curve. A family of Hermite curves can now be seen on screen. Finding Hermite coefficients. We can solve them by using the boundary conditions x of t equals a3t cubed plus a2t squared plus a1t plus a0. X dash t equals 3a3t squared plus 2a2t plus a1. This problem can be solved by the solution now seen on screen. Hermite matrix. The resultant polynomial can be expressed in matrix form, as shown below. We can now define a parametric polynomial for each coordinate required independently, that is, x of t, y of t, and z of t. The resulting matrix and the Hermite basis blending functions are now seen on the screen. The graph shows the shape of the 4 basis functions, often called blending functions. They are labeled with the elements of the control vector that they weight. Note that at each end only, position is non-zero, so the curve must touch the endpoints. Hermite cubic curves are difficult to model. Need to specify point and gradient. Paul D. Castellio, who was working for Citroën, invented another way to compute the curves published by Pierre Bézier from Renault by only giving points instead of the derivatives. Bézier curves can define a curve by specifying two endpoints and two additional control points. The two middle points are used to specify the gradient at the endpoints fit within the convex hull by the control points. Bézier matrix. The cubic form is the most popular. M is the Bézier matrix in the equation x t equals t to the power of t mb q. With n equals 4 and r equaling 0, 1, 2, 3, we get the matrix. Similar matrices can be obtained for y of t and z of t as well. Bézier blending functions. This is how the polynomials for each coefficient look. The functions sum to 1 at any point along the curve. N points have full weight. The weights of each function is clear and labels show the control points being weighted. Complex long curves. Using higher order curves, piece together lower order curves, need to make sure the connection points are smooth. Continuity between curve segments. If the direction and magnitude of d to the power n x of t divided by dt to the power of n are equal at the joint point, curve is called Cn continuous. If two curve segments are simply connected, the curve is C0 continuous. If the tangent vectors of two cubic curve segments are equal at the joint point, the curve is C1 continuous. If the directions of two segment tangent vectors are equal at the joint point, the curve has G1 continuity. Joining Bézier curves. G1 continuity is provided at the endpoint when P3 minus P2 equals K of Q1 minus Q0. If K equals 1, C1 continuity is obtained by the expression now seen on screen. Uniform cubic B-splines. This is another popular form of curve. The curve does not necessarily pass through the control points, can produce a longer continuous curve without worrying about the boundaries, has C2 continuity at the boundaries. The matrix form and the basis functions can now be seen on the screen. The knots specify the range of the curve. This is how the basis splines look over the domain. The initial part is defined after passing the fourth knot. Another usage of uniform cubic B-splines. Representing the joint angle trajectories of characters and robots. Need more control points to represent a longer continuous movement. Need C2 continuity to make the acceleration smooth and not changing the torques suddenly. Catmull-Raum spline. A curve that interpolates control points, C1 continuous. The tangent vectors at the endpoints of a Hermite curve are set such that they are decided by the two surrounding control points. The Hermite specification matrix and the related graph can now be seen on the screen. Bicubic patches. The concept of parametric curves can be extended to surfaces. The cubic parameter curve is in the form q of t equals t to the power t mq. Now we assume qi to vary along a parameter s. Qi s are themselves cubic curves. Bicubic patch has degree 6. Qi of s, t equals t to the power t m q1 of s, q2 of s, q3 of s, q4 of s. The matrix of the bicubic patch is now seen on the screen. Example: we compute x, y, z by the steps shown on the screen. Displaying bicubic patches. Directly rasterizing bicubic patches is not so easy. Need to convert the bicubic patches into a polygon mesh. Tessellation. Need to compute the normals vector cross product of the two tangent vectors. The derivative for the bicubic patches can now be seen on screen. Tangent vectors can be computed by computing the partial derivatives, then computing the cross product of the two partial derivative vectors. Tessellation. As computers are optimized for rendering triangles, the easiest way to display parametric surfaces is to convert them into triangle meshes. The simplest way to do is uniform tessellation, which sample points uniformly in the parameter space. Adaptive tessellation. Adapt the size of triangles to the shape of the surface. For every triangle edges, check if each edge is tessellated enough. Curve tess enough. If all edges are tessellated enough, check if the whole triangle is tessellated enough as a whole. Try tess enough. If one or more of the edges or the triangle's interior is not tessellated enough, then further tessellation is needed. When an edge is not tessellated enough, a point is created halfway between the edge points UV values. New triangles are created and the tessellator is once again called with the new triangles as input. On-the-fly tessellation. In many cases, it is preferred to tessellate on the fly. The size of the data can be kept small. Tessellation is a highly parallel process, can make use of the GPU. The shape may deform in real time. Descriptors. Representations and description. The result of segmentation is a set of regions. Regions have to be represented and described. Representation. An object may be represented by its boundary. Description. The object boundary may be described by its length, orientation, or number of concavities. Two main ways of representing regions. External characteristics. About boundary, focus on shape. Internal characteristics. About internal pixels, focus on color and texture. Why representation and descriptors? Used to reduce amount of data. Description of an image information suitable for use in recognition and classification. Description. A region is represented by boundary, and boundary is represented by some features such as length, regularity. Features should be insensitive to translation, rotation, and scaling. Both boundary and regional descriptors are often used together. Boundary descriptors. In order to represent a boundary, it is useful to compact the raw data. List of boundary pixels. Chain codes. List of segments with defined length and direction. 4-directional chain codes. 8-direction chain codes. It may be useful to downsample the data before computing the chain code. It is used to reduce the code dimension. It is used to remove small detail along the boundary. Representation of boundaries. To remove the dependence from the starting point, the code is a circular sequence. The new starting point is the one which gives a sequence of numbers giving the smallest integer. To normalize with respect to rotation. A signature is a 1D representation of a boundary, which is a 2D thing. It should be easier to describe. For example, distance from centroid versus angle. Signatures are invariant to translation. Invariance to rotation depends on the starting point. The starting point could be the one farthest from the centroid. Scaling varies the amplitude of the signature. Invariance can be obtained by normalizing between 0 and 1, by dividing by the variance of the signature. Representation of a shape. One way to represent a shape is to reduce it to a graph by obtaining its skeleton via thinning, skeletonization. MAT, Medial Axis Transformation Algorithm. MAT is composed by all the points which have more than one closest boundary point. Medial axis transformation. Medial axis augmented by radius function. Transformation is invertible. Use in skeletonization and shape representation. The original image and the output image after applying MAT is shown in the diagram. One way to find medial axis by its erosion. If particular point is disconnecting from an object, that point is known as medial axis. For binary images, medial axis is used to represent shape for an image. Transformation is invertible and the object is reconstructed from medial axis transformations. Example, image for medial axis. Let's take a digital image to get output of medial axis image. Original image. Original image is a digital image. Medial axis image. Medial axis output for an original digital image. The medial axis transformation of a polygon is always a tree, making it fairly easy to use dynamic programming to measure the edit distance between a skeleton of a known model and the skeleton of an unknown object. Whenever the two skeletons are close enough, we can classify the unknown object as an instance of our model. This technique has proven useful in computer vision and in optical character recognition. The figure shows the medial axis, 3 simple regions. Medial axis applications: shape matching, animation, dimension reduction, solid modeling, smoothing or sharpening of shape, motion planning and mesh generation. Boundary descriptors. There are many features that depend on boundary descriptors of objects such as bending energy, curvature, etc. For an irregularly shaped object, the boundary direction is a better representation, although it is not directly used for shape descriptors like centroid, orientation, area, etc. Simple descriptor. 1. Length, for example for chain code. 2. Diameter, length of the major axis. 3. Basic rectangle formed by the major and minor axis. Encloses the boundary and its eccentricity. Major, minor axis. Order of a shape. The number of digits. Shape number. The first difference of smallest magnitude, treating the chain code as a circular sequence. It is advisable to normalize the grid orientation by aligning the chain code grid to the basic rectangle. The figure shows the steps in generation of a shape number. The sequence of boundary points can be treated as a sequence of complex points in the complex plane. It becomes a 1D descriptor. The figure shows a digital boundary and its representation as a complex sequence. The boundary can be approximated by dropping DFT coefficients. Regional descriptors. A large group of shape description techniques is represented by heuristic approaches which yield acceptable results in description of simple shapes. Heuristic region descriptors are area, rectangularity, direction, compactness, etc. Drawback of region descriptors. It is not used for region construction. It does not work for complex shapes. The figure shows the infrared image of America at night. Fourier and wavelet descriptors. Fourier descriptors. Original image representation in the spatial domain and feature values derived by applying Fourier transformation. The feature vector calculated from data representation in the transformed domain, which is called as Fourier descriptors. Definition. Suppose that the boundary of a particular shape has n pixels numbered from 0 to n-1. The kth pixel along the contour has a position xk, yk. So we can describe the contour as two parametric equations. x of k equals xk, y of k equals yk. Let's suppose that we take the Fourier transform of each function. We end up with the two frequency spectra. Ax of v equals f x of k and ay of v equals f y of k. For a finite number of discrete contour pixels, we simply use the discrete Fourier transform. D of t treats the signals as periodic. This is called as Fourier descriptors. We can take things one step further by considering the x, y coordinates of the point not as Cartesian coordinates, but as those in the complex plane. S of k equals x of k plus I y of k. A single Fourier descriptor, which is the transform of the complex function S of k, in a sense, though this is unnecessary. Combining things into a single descriptor instead of two is useful, but it's really only folding one descriptor onto another using complex notation. Properties. Properties of Fourier transform is same as Fourier descriptors. Translation. Shifting a signal in time domain introduces linear phase in the frequency domain. Modulation. A linear phase shift introduced in time domain signals results in the frequency domain. Scaling. Compression of a signal in the time domain results in expansion in frequency domain and vice versa. Convolution. Convolution of two signals in the time domain results in multiplication of their Fourier transforms. Higher dimensional descriptors. Fourier descriptors have also been used to describe higher dimensional shapes. The domain of the function increases from a one-dimensional k for two-dimensional images to an n-1 dimensional one for n-dimensional images. For three-dimensional images, spherical harmonics have been used as higher dimensional basis functions. The n Cartesian coordinates xi, yi of a digital boundary can be represented as S of k equals x of k plus j into y of k for k equals 0 to n-1. The d of t of S of k is given by the equation shown on screen. For u equals 0 to n-1, the complex coefficients a of u are called the Fourier descriptors of the boundary. Then S of k can be written as, since the high-frequency DFT components of S of k only account for details, the Fourier series representation of S of k can be truncated into m less than n elements, resulting in the approximation. It represents all n points of the boundary. Wavelet descriptors. The wavelet transform is used in many applications for image coding as well as feature extraction purposes. It can be used to describe a given object, shape, by wavelet descriptors, WD. Thus, it is used to recognize objects according to their contour shape by deriving a number of WD and comparing them with the WD of stored contour patterns. Wavelet transformations. Similar to the FT, the WT uses elementary functions called wavelets to describe a given signal. In contrast to the FT, which uses harmonic function with different frequencies, the WT uses only one basis wavelet, mother wavelet, to derive the reconstruction signals. Through dilation, compression, and shifting of the mother wavelet, we can derive new variants of this signal, which together constitute the so-called wavelet building set. The general form of wavelet is given by the equation seen on screen. Based on the MRA, we receive the approximate signal for A greater than 1 and detailed signal for A less than 1 as shown. Haar wavelet descriptors. This is obtained by setting the integrals limits to b, b plus a. This interval represents non-zero value between left and right borders of Haar wavelet. The resulting expressions can be seen on screen. Thus, Haar wavelet descriptors. Now interval is set to be 0. Final expression of Hart transform descriptors, HWD. Mexican hat wavelet descriptors. Mexican hat wavelet descriptor is same as Haar wavelet descriptors. Psi of T minus B divided by A is a Mexican hat wavelet set. The corresponding wavelet descriptors are expressed as: using parameter transformation and normalization, the equation will become: after small modification, we receive the following. The above given integration includes the following four terms. Final expression of Mexican hat wavelet descriptor is now seen on the screen. Shape representation and reconstruction. Shape representation. Outline of an object. It is sufficient to identify and characterize an object. Two-dimension shapes can be described in two different ways. Use of the object boundary and its features. Description of region occupied by an object on the image plane. Use of the object boundary and its features. This method is directly connected to line and edge detection, and the resulting description scheme is called external representation. Description of region occupied by an object on the image plane. This method is linked to the region segmentation techniques. The resulting representation scheme is called internal representation. Properties of shape representation. Shape representation scheme must have certain desirable properties: uniqueness, completeness, invariance under geometrical transformations, sensitivity, abstraction from detail. Uniqueness. It is an important property for object recognition. Each object must have a unique representation. Invariance under geometrical representation. Invariance under translation, rotation, scaling, and reflection is very important to the object recognition techniques. Sensitivity. Ability of representation scheme to reflect easily the difference between similar objects. Abstraction from detail. It refers to the ability of the representation to represent the basic features of shape and to abstract from detail. It is directly related to the noise robustness of the representation. We can now see the shape representation flow diagram on the screen. Chain codes. Chain codes are important for boundary following. Advantage of chain code is that it is translation invariant. Scale invariance is obtained by changing the size of sampling grid, producing seldom, however, same chain code. Rotation invariance is obtained by using the different chain code. Figure A shows a 4-connected chain and B 8-connected chain. The difference code chain is given by the expression. It provides a good compression of boundary description. It is used to calculate certain boundary features. Boundary parameter T is given by the expression now seen on screen. The calculations for the object width W and height H are also shown on screen. Chain codes are also used to calculate object area. Level set representation of an image. Consider the image as a stacking of geometrical primitive known as level sets. The representation highlights the geometrical aspects of the signal. The signal is a stacking of geometrical primitives. The processing. In binary processing, one can process the level sets and reconstruct the images. Finally, the process of images through the deformation and its level sets is done by partial differential equations, PDE. Decomposition of images in its level sets. The expression is as shown on screen. Reconstruction of an image from its level sets. The representation and the corresponding figure are given on screen. Voxel representation. In voxel representation, an object is decomposed into identical cells arranged in a fixed, regular grid. These cells are called voxels, volume elements, in analogy to pixels. Example, a cylinder can be represented as follows by voxels. 1 may be represented inside the cylinder, while a 0 may be represented outside the cylinder. Alternatively, we may use 8 bits to represent the transparency value. If a voxel has a value 0, it is a fully transparent cell. If a voxel has a value of 255, it is non-transparent cell. Octree. Octrees are hierarchical tree structures that describe each region of 3D space as nodes. When compared with the basic voxel representation, octrees reduce storage requirements for 3D objects. It also provides a convenient representation for storing information about object interiors. Octrees are the three-dimensional analog of quad trees. The name is formed from oct plus tree, but note that it is normally written octree with only one T. Extension of quadrature, encoding of 2D images. Octree encoding procedure is an extension of the quad tree encoding of 2D images. The figures show the bitmap representation of a 2D object and a quad tree encoding of a 2D object. Quad tree data structure for the above object. F equals full, P stands for partially full, and E stands for empty. The code of this image in quad tree representation will be: for octree representation of 3D data, the numbering method is as follows. Fractals. Fractal objects refer to those objects which are self-similar at all resolutions. Most of the natural objects such as trees, mountains, and coastlines are considered as fractal objects because no matter how distantly or how closely one looks at them, they always appear to be somewhat similar. Fractal objects can also be generated recursively by applying the same transformation function to an object, that is, scale down plus rotate plus translate. The figure shows the fractal snowflake. The name fractal comes from its property, fractional dimension. Unlike Euclidean dimension, the dimensions of fractal objects may not be integers, and we call these dimensions as fractal dimension. Euclidean dimensions and fractal dimensions. A line segment is 1D. If we divide a line into n equal parts, the parts each look like the original line, scaled down by a factor of n. That is, n to the power of 1 by 1. A square is a 2D. If we divide it into n parts, each part looks like the original, scaled down by a factor of n to the power of 1 by 2. For the fractal snowflake, when it is divided into 4 pieces, each resulting piece looks like the original, scaled down by a factor of 3, so it has a dimension d such that 4 to the power of 1 by d equals 3. That is, d equals 1.26. We may also create 3D objects in a similar way by adding a third dimension. The following example replaces each triangle of the object with a pyramid by inserting a single point at each step, except for the bottom face. This will result in a mountain-like object with a regular appearance. To give a more natural appearance to the created object, we usually allow some limited random variations at each level of recursion. Medical representations. Imaging technology in medicine enables doctors to see the interior portions of the body for easy diagnosis. It also helps doctors to make keyhole surgeries for reaching the interior parts without really opening too much of the body. Advantages of digital processing for medical applications. Digital data will not change when it is reproduced any number of times and retains the originality of the data. Offers a powerful tool to physicians by easing the search for representative images. Displaying images immediately after acquiring. Enhancement of images to make them easier for the physician to interpret. That is, quantifying changes over time. Providing a set of images for teaching to demonstrate examples of diseases or features in any image. Quick comparison of images. Medical imaging needs highly trained technicians and clinicians to determine the details of image acquisition. Artificial vision. Artificial systems must be designed to analyze medical data sets either in a partially or even a fully automatic manner. This is a challenging application of the field known as artificial vision. In medical image analysis, as in many practical mathematical applications, numerical simulation should be regarded as the end product. Vision is such a basic aspect of human cognition that it may superficially appear somewhat trivial, but after decades of research, the scientific understanding of biological vision remains extremely fragmentary. The human eye-brain system evolved over tens of millions of years, and at this point, no artificial system is as versatile and powerful for everyday tasks. Algorithms and PDEs. Many mathematical approaches have been investigated for the applications of artificial vision. We can think of an image as a map I. D tends to C, that is, to any point X in the domain D, I associates a color I of X in a color space C. The algorithms all involve solving the initial value problem for some PDE for a given amount of time. The solution to this PDE can be either the image itself at different stages of modification or some other object whose evolution is driven by the image. Introducing an artificial time t, the image can be deformed according to dou I by dou t equals function I, where I of x comma t is to d into 0 comma t tends to c is the evolving image. F is an operator which characterizes the given algorithm, and the initial condition is the input image I0. The processed image is the solution I of x comma t of the differential equation at time t. The operator f usually is a differential operator, although its dependence on I may also be non-local, as shown. Very often, the deformation is obtained as a steepest descent for some energy functional. For example, the energy and its associated steepest descent, the heat equation. The use of PDEs allows for the modeling of the crucial but poorly understood interactions between top-down and bottom-up vision. Medical imaging problems. Low resolution in the spatial and spectral domains, high level of noise, low contrast, geometric deformations, presence of imaging artifacts. Techniques to reduce problems of medical imaging. Image smoothing, image registration, image segmentation. Multi-resolution analysis. Many signals or images contain the information at different scales or levels of detail, that is, people versus buildings. Analyzing information at the same scale will not be effective. Techniques used in multi-resolution. Two techniques are used to represent multi-resolution. These are pyramid coding, subband coding. Image pyramid. A collection of decreasing resolution images arranged in the shape of a pyramid. The original image and the Gaussian pyramid and the Laplacian pyramid are seen on the screen. J plus 1 levels where j equals log n. Usually there are p plus 1 levels where p is less than j. Each level corresponds to 2 to the power j into 2 to the power of j image, where j lies between 0 and 1. Base level 2 to the power j into 2 to the power of j equals 2 to the power of log n into 2 to the power of log n, equaling n into n. For example, if n is 256, there will be 8 plus 1, 9 levels. Two pyramids. Approximation, prediction residual. Approximation pyramid based on Gaussian filter and prediction residual pyramid based on the bilinear interpolation are shown on screen. The last level is the same as that of the approximation pyramid. In the absence of quantization errors, the approximation pyramid can be reconstructed from the prediction residual pyramid. Sub-band coding. Decompose an image or signal into different frequency bands. Analysis step. Decomposition is performed so that the sub-bands can be reassembled to reconstruct the original image without error. Synthesis step. Need to choose appropriate filters, that is, filter bank. Example, sub-band coding, 1D example, 2-band decomposition. The goal of sub-band coding is to select H0 of n, H1 of n, G0 of n, and G1 of n so that f of n equals f cap of n. FLP of n is the approximation of f of n. FLP of n is also the detail of f of n. It can be shown that for perfect reconstruction, the synthesis filters G0 of n and G1 of n must be modulated versions of the analysis filters H0 of n, H1 of n. Of special interest are filters satisfying orthonormality conditions, as shown. An orthonormal filter bank can be designed from one prototype filter as shown. Non-orthonormal filters require two prototype filters. Examples of orthonormal filters are shown on the screen. 4-band decomposition using separable filters is now shown on the screen. Snakes and active contours. What is snake? An energy-minimizing spline guided by external constraint forces and pulled by image forces towards features. Edge detection, subject to contours, motion tracking, stereo matching. Snake behavior. A snake falls into closest local energy minimum. The local minima of the snake energy comprise a set of alternative solutions. Higher-level knowledge is needed to choose the correct one from these solutions. High-level reasoning, user interaction. These high-level methods can interact with the contour model by pushing it toward the appropriate local minimum. They rely on other mechanisms to place them near the desired contour. The existence of such an initializer is application-dependent. Even in the case of manual initialization, snakes are quite powerful in refining the user's input. Basically, snakes are trying to match a deformable model to an image by means of energy minimization. Parametric representation. V of S equals X of S, Y of S. The snake parametric representation is given on the screen. E int stands for internal energy due to bending, serves to impose piecewise smoothness constraint. E image stands for image forces pushing the snake toward image features, edges, etc. E con is external constraints responsible for putting the snake near the desired local minimum. It may come from higher level interpretation, user interaction, etc. Internal energy. The snake is a controlled continuity spline and it regularizes the problem given on screen. The first order derivative Vs of S makes the spline act like a membrane, elasticity. The second order derivative Vss of S makes it act like a thin plate, rigidity. Alpha S and beta S control the relative importance of controls and thin membrane and thin plate. Setting beta S equals 0 for a point allows the snake to become second-order derivative for discontinuous and develop a corner. Image forces. Attracts the snake to feature. The E-image equation is given on the screen. Lines stand for the simplest functional in the image intensity. Depending on the sign of W line, the snake will be attracted to the lightest or darkest nearby contour. Edges. one can simply set edge. The E-edge equation is now seen on the screen. Attracts the snakes to a large intensity gradients. Snake convergence. If part of a snake finds low energy feature, then the spline term will pull neighboring parts toward a possible continuation of the feature found. In fact, this places a large energy well around a good local minimum. Scale space. Minimization by scale continuation. Facial smoothing edge or line functional. E-edge is given by minus g sigma del squared I whole squared, where g sigma is a Gaussian with standard deviation. Minima lie on zero crossings of g sigma del squared I. Snake comes to equilibrium on a blurry energy. Slowly reduce the blurring. Termination functional. Attracts the snake towards termination of line segments and corners. Let C of x, y be equal to g sigma x, y into I of x, y divided by 2, smoothed image. Let theta equal tan inverse cy by cx be the gradient angle. N equals cos theta, sin theta, unit vector along gradient. N perpendicular equals minus sin theta cos theta perpendicular to gradient f. E term is defined using curvature of level lines in C of x, y. The resulting E term equations can now be seen. Subjective contours are now represented on screen. Combining E-edge and E-term, we can create a snake attracted to edges and terminations. The shape of the snake between the edges and lines in the illusion is completely determined by the spline smoothness term. The same snake can find traditional edges in natural images. Hysteresis. Snake tracking a moving subjective contour. The snake bends until the internal spline forces overpower image forces. Then the snake falls off the line and returns to a smoother shape. This figure shows the snake and active contour models. Motion tracking. Once a snake finds a feature, it locks on. If the feature begins to move, the snake will track the same local minimum. Fast motion could cause a snake to flip into a different minimum. Snake energy minimization. When alpha s and beta s are constant, we get two independent Euler-Lagrange equations. When alpha s and beta s are not constant, then it is simpler to use a discrete formulation, as shown. Let f of xi equal dou by dou xi of E external, where derivatives are approximated by finite differences, if they cannot be computed analytically. The corresponding Euler equations are now seen on the screen. In matrix from where A is a pentadiagonal banded matrix, taking into account the derivatives requires changing A at each iteration, speed up at each iteration. We assume that fx and fy are constant during a time step. Then explicit Euler method with respect to the external forces. Internal forces are specified by A. We can evaluate the time derivative at t rather than at t minus 1. Snake energy minimization. At equilibrium, the time derivative vanishes. The Euler equation can be solved by a matrix inversion as shown here. The matrix inversion can be calculated by the LU decomposition method in O of n time.